Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by you, the fans of the show. If you go to patreon.com/theworldwanders, you can find out more about the cool bonuses and rewards we have for supporters of the show. You can sign up and get an interesting postcard from somewhere in the world or exclusive content. Just go to patreon.com/theworldwanders to find out more.
And another quick announcement before we dive into this episode of the show. We have an awesome online community that we've just started separate to our Facebook page. And we would love for all of you out there who are listening to the podcast to join us. And so you can find that on the show notes at theworldwanders.com, or you can just search World Wanders, a community for travelers, and we'll get you access. And it's lots of like-minded people who enjoy traveling the world. There's travel bloggers, digital nomads, people from all over who are just talking about all things travel. So we would love to see you there.
All right, Steve and Julia, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Pleasure.
For everyone listening, you guys will remember from the Japan episode, Steve and Julia made a cameo appearance there that went over very well.
We got good feedback from our listeners and wanted to bring you on the show a second time.
Oh, great.
No, we actually have wanted to talk to you guys for months now, so it's cool. Just for context, we are actually sitting around Steve and Julia's kitchen table in Charleston, South Carolina, so it's way more fun to do this conversation in person than to do it over Skype.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys have recently wrapped up like a year and a half of off and on travel, have settled into an apartment and kind of slowing down for a little while. So I wanted to start back at the beginning, which is where you guys got the idea to travel in the first place, and the kind of steps that led up to moving from Atlanta to go travel.
You want to start?
Nope.
So, within the last, 5 or 6 years or something like that, we've had a series of family deaths. It started with my mom dying, 2012 or 2013 or something.
2013.
And then Julia's dad died, and my dad died, and my grandfather died, and Julia's grandmother died, all in a short period of time. And we were like, well, everybody wants to push their traveling till after they retire, but I don't know if we're going to retire. There's a chance both of us are going to die tomorrow. So we thought, why don't we get our travels out of the way now, before we have kids, before we settle down. There's this window. We both work online. And that way, if anything happens, we'll have already done our big adventure.
Was it something both of you wanted to do, or did someone convince the other to?
Yeah, it funnily enough started with my college roommate. I looked her up on Instagram and I saw she was traveling, but she didn't really have like a direction. I felt like in life, like even when we were in college and kind of like now she's part of, I think AmeriCorps, and she's kind of a free spirit. And I was thinking, here's my college roommate, like, living life, having a good time. And I was thinking, why are we waiting to travel? We should go on a trip. And I think it was originally like a small trip.
Yeah.
It was going to be like a trip to Alaska or something. And then we were like, well, why do we even need to have an apartment? Like, maybe we should just pack up and travel for a long time.
Yeah, we saw your friend she was a woofer.
Oh yeah, she's woofing.
She was in Alaska, I think, and we were like, what's she doing in Alaska? And then that led to woofing, which is where you like volunteer on a farm and you get to stay on the farm for free, do farm help without, that could be fun. And then that one thing led to another, like, well, maybe we don't even need to woof, maybe we could just do this traveling. And then at the time, had a little bit of inheritance from all the people dying, and we found a way to maximize that. We took some of our inheritance and paid down college loans with a credit card, with multiple credit cards, to get the airline points. So in a very short period of time, we got like $750,000 airline points, something like that, just by paying down student loans and paying pretty small fees on them. So the actual place-to-place travel wasn't going to be that expensive. It was just, a small increase in our expenses to try to knock out as many countries as we could.
And so when you guys had that idea and made that plan, what was your original, where did you originally want to go and how long did you want to go for?
I think we were a bit too ambitious.
So we shot we shot for 35 countries in 2 years. We were going to try to do it in 2 years.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And we planned it out. We went, okay, we're going to start here. We're going to go this country, this airline with these airline points, and kind of planned it all out.
We spent so much time we had so much time wasted on planning that was never used, I would say.
It wasn't wasted. It was really fun.
It was fun. It built excitement for sure.
Yeah, and then we started selling our stuff. So as the time got closer, we got less and less stuff, and we were going to live out of a suitcase, and it was the anticipation of the adventure was half the fun, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you guys had, because I remember when we met you, you had this all planned, because we met you about 3 months before you left Atlanta, which was 4.5 months before you guys left on your adventure.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you guys were well into the planning process when we met you. And then, so you took off, and where was your first location again?
Ireland.
Yeah.
Flew to Ireland first.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And so you get over to Europe, and what was that experience like?
You go, darling. I'm talking too much.
It was fun. I had been to Ireland before. It was good to see it again. It was one of my favorite countries that I had been to previously. So it was really nice to see it. And I would say our trip started off really well. I would say we had a little bit of trouble finding work-travel balance for a little bit. Because everything was really exciting and we were moving pretty often. So we were moving every 3 to 4 days, really, I would say.
That was tough, yeah. And Julia was doing 98% of the logistical planning. So I had it easy. She had a much harder job of moving here and then the Airbnb there. And originally we were going to do couch surfing and house sitting, and we did a little bit of house sitting, which is where you get to stay for free in somebody's house in exchange for watching their pet. Or in our case, when we were in London, we did some housework for somebody while they were gone, painted their walls, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But as it went on, it was clearer and clearer that what we needed was just longer periods of time in one place, rather than 3 days here, 3 days there. Maybe you save a little bit of money. Just to have a 2-week chunk of time in a place was a lot easier.
It became pretty obvious that I think the first 3 months that we were, or 2 months that we were out, we moved pretty much 3 to 4 days. The whole trip.
Almost, yeah.
Almost the whole trip we moved every 3 to 4 days, which looking back at that, I think was really rough, and we traveled much differently after that first 2 months.
Yeah, and we're also private people, so when you're doing Airbnbs, or we stayed with her family in Norway for a bit, you don't have that much privacy. Mm-hmm. So it was just kind of extending week after week of not being able to totally get back on the same page and feel like you've got full privacy and you can kind of recharge because we're both more introverted. So that was hard. One of the places we stayed in Ireland, there was this super sweet lady, couple, and they had just started Airbnb, and they didn't quite know the dynamics of the host to guest interactions. And so they kept checking in on us. We were in our room, they'd knock on the door, come in, tell us about, you're going to go to this place? Let me tell you about what you can do here. Yeah. Bro, we just want to sleep. We're both working. This is not just pure vacation.
Yeah.
So it was funny in hindsight, but it was also pretty tiring.
Yeah, it's tough too when somebody's trying to give you a good experience, they're really making an effort to be kind, and you're your kindness is kind of just bothering me.
Yeah, or you feel like you can't give them a review that's they were way too friendly.
Yeah.
And for other people, it's not our circumstance was really weird, and they didn't quite understand it because we were working online when we were doing this. So we were trying to say, it's halfway vacation and halfway work. So we would spend a lot of time on our Airbnbs in our rooms, and people would be worried about us. Why are these people? Those people are in another country and they're not out. something's going on. We need to intervene, you know?
Yeah, they're like, are they sick?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so almost immediately, did you guys find that the trip was different than you'd expected, that you'd pictured in your minds before going?
It was much more difficult because we had anticipated spending longer periods of time places, but the way things worked out, we didn't know soon enough where we were going, and therefore once we got into a city, unless we wanted to spend an astronomical amount of money, we were almost forced to really spend 3 days in a place at a time, just because of that availability and affordability. So it was a lot harder than we expected because Airbnbs were just booking off the shelf, and we just really didn't have enough lead time to book in advance the way we should have or wanted to.
Yeah, and that was harder, again, on Julia than it was me, because she was doing a lot of that booking. So for me, it was pretty close to how I was envisioning it, a little bit more difficult. And then once we left Europe, we can talk about it later, but once we left English-speaking Europe, so we left Ireland and England, I found it was a lot harder for me to get the interviews for my podcast in non-English speaking countries than I thought it was going to be. So Norway, it was really hard. Germany was really hard. I thought it'd be really easy to just go to the university, but it was not that simple.
Just because not as many English speakers.
Not as many English speakers that are at least comfortable talking about their subject matter in English. So like this happened most pronounced when I was in Japan. We were there for like 3 weeks, and I got one interview. And I was emailing people back and forth, and I know people spoke English, but they were a little uncertain about their English, so I finally got to speak with this Buddhist monk who was at least had the psychology to try. You know, it was a rough interview because there was a definite language barrier there, even though it wasn't English.
Yeah, so traveling to non-English speaking countries is hard then for work.
For my particular thing, yes. Interviewing people for my podcast, for sure.
Yeah, I guess it gives this kind of interesting opportunity to talk to people around the world, but then it's also like you don't have a translator, so that makes it challenging.
Right.
And then was there anything else that was different than you guys anticipated?
Well, I got sick on our trip, and that was very unexpected. We were expecting to have a really good time, and I started feeling bad. So I think a lot of that was due to stress and sleeping patterns and all of this, and different food. But all of it combined kind of sent my body into this like weird rhythm where I was like losing hair, and my joints were really painful, and I couldn't even really enjoy the trip because I was not feeling well. And Steve was doing well, and I felt there was like this guilt associated with feeling bad on this international trip that we had planned, that were, like once in a lifetime trip. And I was having a really hard time accepting that my body was like breaking down while we were traveling.
Yeah, and there were some places where we knew we were going to be really hard. Like when we were in Norway, it was just with your family nonstop, and it was like, okay, this is going to be tough. We're not going to be able to recoup. We just got to prepare for it. And then we went from Norway to Germany, which was also really tough because we were staying in a hostel, cramped with Syrian refugees. That made it difficult as well. And then once that finished, it was like building stress. We went to the Czech Republic, which was awesome. It was by far the best time that we had in Europe. But I could tell that Julia was like was beat. You were super stressed. Your body was exhausted. It was like I could tell you couldn't quite enjoy as much as I was enjoying the coolness of the experience that we could have had there.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about like we've both been sick in a different way, like had food poisoning and stuff. And it's scary. It's scary to be sick in a country that's not your home country, where you don't know what the medical system's like, or if you're going to get a doctor that speaks your language. But it's also scary to just have your body feel weird when you're away. I remember when we were in Spain, I got like this weird lump in my armpit. I think it was just because it was so hot and I was wearing an antiperspirant deodorant. And I remember like freaking out like being like, am I getting cancer like in Spain? Do I have to go home? Like just terrified because I didn't understand what was happening with my body. So I can definitely relate to the feeling of just being like, okay, I've never felt this way before. This is weird. I'm in a foreign place. Like, I only had Ryan with me. It's like, I can't just call somebody and be like, hey, can you come like look at me or reassure me that I'm fine or make me a cup of tea or something like that.
Could have asked Ryan to give you a biopsy.
Find
malignant.
Yeah,
like a plastic knife.
Oh God. Yeah, fortunately for me, it was just like I stopped wearing deodorant in my left arm for like a week and I was fine. So very like minor, different scale than yours, but I definitely can relate to that. Like, I remember going out in Spain and just being like, oh, there's like a weird lump in my armpit. That's good. Am I dying?
Yeah, and for Julia too, and for both of us a little bit, but more for Julia, part of it was exhaustion. So it was exhaustion with like brain fog. So and that just colors all of the experiences. It's not like, like I had food poisoning in Thailand. That stunk. I was indoors, but it was over. It was a one period of time. When it's exhaustion, it doesn't go away. It just colors the whole thing, morning to night.
Yeah. So, you guys, what was your original plan after the Czech Republic?
Well, we were thinking of going to South Africa. I still very much want to go to South Africa and Madagascar. That was going to be a really long plane ride, so we kind of mulled it over for a bit and decided maybe we should try somewhere closer first and see how things pan out. So after the Czech Republic, we ended up in England.
Yep.
Yeah, and England was our last country before we decided that we just needed to really come home and figure out what was going on.
Yep.
And so what actually brought you to that decision, and what was that decision like? Because I think that it's really important, or like I think it's really important for people to hear that decision-making process, because I think a lot of people deal with stuff like this on the road, but they feel a lot of like they're a quitter, or like they have guilt because they didn't follow through, or they like gave up or something. But I think that there's times where it's really important to do what you feel like is best for you.
Yeah, so I remember vividly like getting off of a train. I think we had just gone to see Harry Potter World or something, and we were getting off the train. I think it was a 2-hour train ride, and I remember getting off and feeling like my legs were not working correctly. Like they really hurt, and I just felt like my legs weren't stable and my joints weren't stable. Like they almost felt loose. It's kind of hard to explain, but I remember feeling like, wow, that's really extreme. Like I should not be feeling like this. And then we talked about going and seeing a doctor in England, but we didn't know really anything about how to use the health system. And I had insurance, but I didn't really know, and I had travel insurance too, and I didn't really know, how much that was going to cover, and I knew my insurance was good if I went home. And so we just decided that it's probably better in the long run to just buy the tickets, go home, get medical stuff done at home, and then travel when I feel better. And that's really exactly what we did.
Yeah, I mean, you were pretty done with it.
Yeah.
Because you were in your body. So I remember we were doing the house sitting in England, and when we were there, one of the things we were doing like manual labor in exchange for staying in these people's apartment. And it was like, moving furniture around, painting and stuff. And I think I had more of a tolerance for like, all right, yeah, I'm tired, but yeah, this is once in a lifetime. I know when we go back home, we're going to settle down. Like, I want to keep going. And you kind of laid down the law. Like, I can't. My body is giving out.
Yeah.
So, and then it was like, okay, well, obviously then the rational decision is not to have your body fall apart as we're traveling. We need to go home.
Yeah, and I mean, we went home and we did find out that I, had some autoimmune stuff going on, and the travel just kind of spurred it. And
yep.
I mean, I don't feel like it wasn't like I came home, I didn't get any answers, and I was like, oh, it was in my head, you know?
Right.
That would have been really dissatisfying, or it's like, oh, your body just can't handle traveling.
Right.
Like, you're just crazy, you know? It was a legitimate thing. I felt kind of a bit vindicated after we went home. It was like, I wasn't making it up.
Well, and so we also figured out that cold weather set her off, especially traveling, walking, moving in cold weather. So then we had a little bit of time to readjust, and we thought, okay, well, maybe we can still do traveling, just not in the cold weather. So we came home only, I think, 2 months after we left the first time, and then we were back home for a few months.
We did some traveling in the U.S.
Yeah, we went spent some time in California, then went up to see you guys in Canada, and we were in Michigan, back to New York. So we still did domestic traveling, but we thought, okay, winter's coming up in New York. Winter is awful in New York, which is going to set her off. Mm-hmm. So we thought, well, why don't we just skip all of our Asian and African travels? We'll just go straight to the Southern Hemisphere. We wanted to go to New Zealand. We thought we were going to end our trip in New Zealand and then come home. We thought, well, why don't we just go to New Zealand now, because it's going to be summertime there. So December, I think, rolled around. Yeah, December rolled around, and that's what we did. We started the second leg, and we thought, okay, well, even if we have to come back home because the travel doesn't work, we'll at least have warmer weather while we're out than we would in New York. And so we spent 3 months in New Zealand, which worked out pretty well. Your body was doing a lot better by then. It was warmer. And then that started kind of our Asian leg.
Yeah, and so when you guys went to New Zealand, you guys got an apartment for a month or 2 months?
2 months in Auckland.
Yeah.
Yep.
And did you find, because on your first trip, you guys learned that you didn't like moving around consistently as much. Did you find that it was a lot better for you, that travel experience, where you had a place?
Oh, yeah.
At least 10,000 times better.
Yeah.
So just a little bit.
Yeah.
Auckland is still one of my favorite places. I loved it. It was this tiny little apartment that we had, but it was located in a really nice place. And it was beautiful. People were nice. It was a ridiculously safe district. And so Europe was kind of this shifting every 4 days, and like things are uncertain, and it was cold. New Zealand was, everybody's nice, they have a cool accent, and the weather's nicer for 2 months. Like, we had a lease, so we were stable. That just totally changed the experience.
That's what we found on our past trip too. Working and trying to travel, it's at least for us and most people we talk to, it's so much better to have like at least a month somewhere where you can get into a routine, because if you're trying to move fast, you end up just feeling guilty on like both sides, because you're like not enjoying your trip because you're thinking about the work stuff you should be doing, or you're not working and you feel like you should be. That's one of our big lessons. It's like if you're trying to balance work with travel, you really have to create something that's in between and not just try to do both at once.
Yeah.
And I think that time allowed us to like find different things in the city that we enjoyed too. Like, we worked at a co-working space a little bit. There was a really cool coffee shop down the road. Like, we figured out what we liked. We even made a friend pretty much down the road at this fish shop, and you know, he told us a little bit about how he got to New Zealand. There's a lot of immigrants in Auckland, and we learned a lot about Auckland, and I feel like New Zealand, just staying there for so long.
Yeah, the nature is beautiful, and I got a set of really great interviews. I had an interview with a guy, Dr. Patrick Gerard, who was he does work in logic, and he does a little bit of work in mathematics. And it worked out super well because it was their summer, so he was like on his summer vacation. He was staying at his sister-in-law's place or something out in the New Zealand countryside, which also happened to be a mansion. So he was like, hey, yeah, this interview sounds great, but would you like to come out to our mansion in the New Zealand countryside? And we were like, yeah. So it was this cool experience. We went out there, and they had like, it was this beautiful building, they had goats and stuff, and he drove us around on his little farm. Which that was a really cool experience that we got to have.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of those experiences that you probably wouldn't have had if you were only there for like 3 days.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Did you, in this second trip, were you guys feeling like, oh, we're excited to be back out of the U.S. and traveling, or was it kind of like, oh, maybe we should have just like found a place to live in the States and settled down and stay?
No, we were like, I was super excited to be outside of the States, especially because upstate New York in the winter is just horrible, and New Zealand was beautiful, and our trip was really awesome the second time we went out.
Yeah, and I would say, so upstate New York in the winter is awful is true statement, but upstate New York is awful and the winter is awful. Put them together and they're even more awful. So we were like chomping at the bit, ready to get out. There was a thought of, well, maybe we just move down south in the States, that would be easier. But we just figured the time it's just a perfect opportunity to go to where it's summer and we can continue our travels, and if it works, you know, because we're going to be in the Southern Hemisphere for a while, we'll go to Australia after that, it's going to be hot, we'll just stay out. And it worked.
Yeah, I mean, the logistics of like moving down south and then going back out to finish our travels would have been a nightmare.
Yeah.
To like rebuy everything and then resell everything and then rebuy everything when we get back. Yeah.
So you said like moving down south and then finishing our travels.
Yeah.
Like even in the situation where you'd move somewhere, you guys were both still committed to going to Asia and to Australia. What was kind of like driving you guys to like finish your travels?
At some point we're going to have kids, and then I feel like we're going to be a little less free for a period of time. And we might die. So like, there's a finite window that we have, and it just seemed like we should take advantage of the opportunity.
So short answer, mortality.
But so I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, okay, you know, I've got to enjoy my life. But what was it about traveling for you guys that made you think, like, this is we might die, we need to travel, as opposed to, like, we might die, we should go clubbing?
Right.
Well...
Part of it was the airline points, too. Like, we already had the airline points that are going to expire, so you're already kind of pushed down that direction. It's something I've always wanted to do. I know you wanted to do it.
I mean, I also feel like we both like learning a lot, and I feel like traveling for us opened up a whole new perspective about the world. And I hate to say this, but like living in the States, you really don't think about other people in other countries. Like, I think about other people and their experiences and I guess how the world interacts way more now. I'm just like, wow, there's other people, and this sounds stupid, but there's other people in the world living life, and they're living it in a totally different way than an American would. And it's, you know, it can be really great. Like, other cultures can be really great, and you can learn a lot, and just have a better perspective and a more broad perspective of your life and contextualize it with the world.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us have ever felt like we're Americans, like we embody American culture. And you guys know, because we're not very cultured in general, so we're kind of fishes out of water in the States. So to be able to see other cultures and experience other cultures as somebody that hasn't really felt like an insider was cool too, because there wasn't culture. I didn't experience anywhere culture shock that was like, oh my gosh, I want to go home, or like how people report it. It was just, I kind of felt like a cultural explorer.
Yeah, I feel much more like a global citizen, I would say. Yeah. And
it worked out perfectly with my podcast. So it was like, I want to start this podcast, Patterson in Pursuit, if you guys are interested, your listeners. And it was I go around interviewing professors at universities about big ideas. So it was like this perfect hand-in-glove fit with why not mix that in with our travels. Because that's going to be I feel like the rest of my career, I can look back on that series that I produced traveling. It's really high quality. It's really awesome. So it was a once-in-a-lifetime for us personally, and I think professionally too.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that, Julia, you touched on something that resonates with me. Like, I feel like I didn't realize how in my, like, tiny little bubble I was until I left. And I was like, whoa, like, other people do, like, other things and, like, work these, like, obscure jobs and stuff. And now I feel like I'm kind of in that category, but I certainly wasn't on that path before I started traveling and meeting people doing that stuff. Because I just didn't know it existed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just like how normal, like, even though it's weird and different, it just like it's normal wherever you go. It's like, oh, this is, you know, normal life, and you just get to kind of observe it. And it takes you got like a lot of weird abstractions about like what Spain means or Czech Republic, and especially like a lot of them are built from like the news, so it's bad things. So just having like now this like real firm, tangible idea of like what Japan is like and all these other countries are like. I feel like it just makes you like feel like a lot more connected to like being on Earth essentially.
I feel like my ideas of other countries now are much more people centric rather than like news centric or government centric or anything like that. I feel when I go to a place now, or when I think of a place, I think of people first.
For sure, people and culture.
Yeah. And food. Of course.
Yeah.
Always.
You kind of learn something about humans in the abstract, because there are certain cultural ideas that are only skin deep, like how you, like, for example, is it okay to litter in the street in whatever city you're in? Well, that belief changes completely depending on where you are. Some places in the world, it's accepted that you litter. Other places in the world, it's not accepted. And there's strong beliefs, but they're just skin deep. They change based on geography. But I feel like there are other more fundamental truths about being a human that you can also discover about, people seem to value family everywhere that you go. They seem to value economic progress wherever you go. So it's like you get a more real access to what it means to be a human when you can find out what those skin deep cultural beliefs are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So where would you guys so after New Zealand you went to Australia and then met up in Japan, what are some of the places that stood out the most to you on that travel? On that travel. Just the whole thing, everywhere.
On what metric? So there's, Czech Republic's amazing and beautiful, both Prague and the countryside. England stood out to me because of the huge Islamic influence that's in London. I wasn't expecting that, so that was a bit of a culture shock. That was interesting to see. Japan, we found our people. Our people do exist culturally, and they were just in Japan.
Just, across the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'd say. And for me, Thailand stood out. Julie went home after Japan. I went to Thailand for a couple weeks and then came home. And I had an idea of what Thailand was based on talking with people about the Thai hospitality, and my expectation was not met at all in Thailand.
What do you think your expectation was?
I thought it was going to be really nice, service culture, where there's Thai hospitality as a thing, that's a phrase. And we had just come from Japan, which they're not really known, I think, as much. There's not Japanese hospitality, but you just get huge doses of it while you're over there. Just everybody is super nice.
Yeah.
And so in Thailand, it was more of it was very, very superficial. I got in the day that I arrived, people don't really respect you. They don't really care about you. It's more like a means to an end. I feel like while we were in Japan, people treated you as a human who's trying to navigate life. In Thailand, I kind of felt like you're an obstacle or a commodity there. And it was dirtier than I was expecting. So my experience might have been colored by the food poisoning, but I was expecting it to be a kind of a nicer place. And the thing I really didn't like, culturally speaking, is in Thailand, they are very, I'd say, worshipful of their king, of their political leaders, and they have pictures of him everywhere, and you can get in legal trouble for saying bad things about the king. Mm-hmm. That's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And it's in your face everywhere you go is this dude's picture when you're walking around.
Yeah, or the black ribbons everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the king just died.
Right. So.
Did you go to a movie at all?
I didn't. No, I was mostly indoors for my trip.
So when you go to a movie in Thailand, they play the King song, and so everyone has to stand. It's illegal not to stand.
I heard about that. I'm very glad. You guys told me about how cool it was to go to the movies. I don't know if you might have told me about that other part.
I think we told you.
I must have forgotten. I'm glad I didn't go, because I would have been really ethically convicted or conflicted there.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to promote a culture of worshiping a government figure, and I don't want to be thrown in jail. So it's like, I don't know what I would have done in that circumstance.
Yeah.
I'm very glad you didn't go to the movies.
And so, did you guys have plans to go home after Japan, or what did that look like for you? Was that the original plan, or uncertain?
I think after our plans didn't go, like our plans were completely offset in our first trip, we didn't plan as much the second time around, which I'm really glad we didn't. So yeah, I think we just kind of had an open-ended plan, and we had spent I think it was around 6 months out when Japan came to a close, and we were thinking about going out longer, but I was ready to go home, and Steve wanted to go to Thailand, so we just split up and met up in a couple of weeks, and yeah, we were totally fine with that. And we felt after Japan, we really felt like our traveling, like our experiences and what we wanted to experience had been completed in some sense.
Yeah, and when we were originally planning where we were going to visit, Thailand was on the list for both of us, but Julia decided, just for all the medical stuff, that she didn't want to risk getting food poisoning.
Ironically, yeah.
Good call. So that kind of shortchanged some of the other countries that we were going to go to. And the only one I really wanted to go to was Thailand, because I wanted to get interviews with Thai Buddhists. So I got to do that, and I got the food poisoning.
Yeah.
That's the combo pack.
But you got to eat the mango sticky rice.
That's what gave me the food poisoning.
Yeah, I know. I think from a place we recommended too.
So if you guys were to be like writing yourself a letter with some like travel lessons to yourself in the past, like when you were planning it out, like what are some of the things you'd put in there?
Don't eat the mango sticky rice all the time.
Eat the mango sticky rice, though.
If you see a Washington tap water, which I did, I still made the decision to eat it after I saw Washington tap water. I was like, I paid for it. I already paid the $2.
Right.
What's a little food poisoning?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. You don't know if you're playing like Russian roulette or if you found somewhere safe.
Right.
It's like, I found somewhere I didn't get sick yesterday. Maybe that means you shouldn't go back, but maybe that means you should go back. It's hard to know which one.
What would you say, darling?
I would say that I agree that the massive amount of time we spent planning was also exciting, but I also feel like I spent more time planning than you did, and I definitely feel like I wasted so many hours like planning things out to the T that never happened, and that were completely useless. So,
was that even with the countries that you did end up going to?
No, I would say it's the first leg that we had 15 countries figured out, and the specific flights we were going to take, and the dates, and everything changed. I mean, everything. And I would also say, if you're not a fan of cold weather, probably don't start traveling in Europe until June.
Yeah.
Or July.
Yeah, I'd say if you want to work, definitely stay longer. If you want to do the move every 3 or 4 days, that's cool, but don't plan on working.
Yeah. I mean, we moved every 3 or 4 days. In our very first backpacking trip, we were 21 and 22, and I remember just being exhausted from that, constantly tired. And I think people were like, how did you sleep on planes, trains, buses? And I think it's because I was tired constantly. That when you're that tired, you can sleep anywhere. And then when we went to South America, we slowed down, quote unquote slowed down a little bit, but hardly.
But I think, so both of those times we didn't have any other responsibilities, so it makes it a lot easier because you don't feel guilty if you're not being super productive. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's still exhausting, though, I think is what I was trying to communicate in less words.
Yeah. But I think it is, so with the planning point, I think this is something we've kind of learned too, is as you start traveling, part of it is you have freedom to go places, so it's important to leave yourself that freedom to change and for your preferences to change. So it's you get to Europe and you're this isn't the whole point. The point of it isn't necessarily travel, it's to do something that makes you happy, and you need to keep that in mind and be able to be flexible with that. I think that's something for us too that we've still struggle with, because like when we start, like, oh, we're gonna go here, then it's like here, then it's here, because that's kind of the natural urge to do stuff.
Yeah, we're like, oh, we've booked something, we've paid for it, like now we gotta stay. That's especially like I'm like, we paid for it, and Ryan's like, it's a sunk cost, like it doesn't matter at this point. If we're not happy, we should leave. But you really want to go to the airport and just like buy the cheapest flight somewhere.
Yeah, I really wanted to like do, since we're in Asia, we have like no responsibilities location wise. I really wanted to do something like really sporadic one day, like let's just go to Santiago or like something crazy like that. But we didn't have enough money to pull that off or have an experience. We got to Taiwan and we got to like, we were taking the train in, and I was kind of like, okay, fuck this, let's just leave. Let's just like go back and go somewhere else. But
yeah, I mean, with that though, I think it's important to kind of give places a chance as well, because we ended up leaving Taiwan really happy with our experience there. So I don't know.
One specific thing I learned that for some reason I still haven't incorporated into travels, because I just came back from Panama with my brother not that long ago, and the same thing happened. And then I remember thinking to myself, why did you forget about that, Steve? It has to do with immigration controls. Every country, pretty much, when I think of visiting the country, I think of, oh, you fly into the airport and then you go take an Uber to the Airbnb and you go visit the city. No, that's not how it works. You fly into the airport and then you wait in line. And then if you're in a country where the immigration people aren't nice, you get barked at and you get yelled at, and you got to worry, oh crap, do I have the right visa? Am I doing this right? Did I bring some fruit from another country? Am I going to get thrown in jail? The immigration controls are a lot bumpier and more scary than I was planning.
Yeah, it's terrible too, because it's like your first impression of most countries.
It is.
And it's like they're probably like the worst people to be giving a first impression.
Yeah.
Other than like places like Singapore, where it's like super streamlined, but yeah, so many of them are terrible.
I mean, even Japan's wasn't very good.
Yeah, we had to wait like an hour and a half or something like that.
Well, you know who has the scariest immigration people? Canada.
I feel like most people would disagree with that. But.
Those cats, man. They're so intimidating.
Well, like in Thailand, I remember it was actually a kind of a sign of things to come. They were very aggressive, and like the building was kind of crummy. I flew into DMK, which is like the main one.
It's terrible.
Yeah, and they're dressed in military garb. They got like berets on, and they're telling you, get in this line, get in that. People from this country can go in that line. You go in that line,
and they have big guns. Like, you don't want to mess with that.
They do. Yeah, so that first experience was like, whoa, this place, they want to communicate to you they're serious about their immigration controls and their laws, which is a little off-putting.
Yeah.
A little unsettling.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of mentioned that you have your podcast. Where can people go to find that?
Steve-Patterson.com, and there's a podcast section. It's called Patterson in Pursuit. You can also Google it or YouTube it. It's there.
Yeah, sounds good. And then, do you have anything you want to share?
No.
Okay. Maybe a podcast that people can look up.
Not yet. No. My website is julia-patterson.com, because we are individuals. And it will be changing soon. And we'll have interesting things on it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.